Hello, Reese. How was work? Okay, let's do this. I just have to mute my notifications. Oh, my alerts have been hidden the entire time. Oops. That's from the last video I did. Oh, fuck. All right. I'll put myself in the corner. Let me lock my party so no one joins. All right. All right, and I can swap between the two. All right. Hey, what's up, YouTube? We're back with another tier list video covering armor passives this time and how they perform on the Hive worlds. A lot of people have been asking me for this one, even though I don't typically do these kind of war bonds. I thought this would be an interesting one just because Hive worlds have definitely jostled the hierarchy of armor passives up quite a bit. And I think a lot of people are looking at armor differently because you can't just run always the same thing on the Hive worlds just because, damn, those dragons and that acid from the Hive worm hurts a lot. So let's get into the tier list. All right, let's find the first one. The first one would be Democratic Detonation. Okay, or Democracy Protects. All right, so Democracy Protects is our first one. It's a 50% chance to not die from lethal damage, which is pretty good. Just remember that it's every instance of lethal damage is a roll. So if you get hit by something, then you go ragdoll. You have to win the first 50% chance to survive the first hit, then the second one when you smack into the wall, and then maybe a third one if you like have to fall some more or something else hits you. So it doesn't always feel like a 50% chance to survive an encounter. It's more of like it can be like a 20% depending on how many damage instances you take before you're able to stim. So just keep that in mind when looking at that, because I do see people like kind of like, well, it's 50-50 chance to survive. And it's true if you're just taking one damage instance. You're not always just taking one damage instance. You could be like smacked by a charger, but he might drag you along and you're going to keep taking damage because of that. And you're going to die regardless, right? So keep that in mind. The second part, though, is you're basically immune from bleeding, right? You take a chest injury, no bleeding, which is actually a lot better than it was like 5 months ago, because recently they actually buffed the damage to bleeding out, which actually makes a lot of the armors that have something that affects that way more appealing. So it actually makes me want to put Democracy Protects in like actually a fairly high rating of like a B, whereas previously it was closer to like a C tier, mostly just because it kind of felt like a 1 perk because bleeding just didn't affect you. The second part, though, is like being able to survive damage instances. You will possibly be able to survive like a Hive Lord slam or something along those lines. The acid will still kill you because there's like a damage over time effect on the second part. But if you get hit correctly by the Hive Lord slam, you should actually survive. And for the occasional rupture warrior coming up out of the ground, heat-seeking projectile towards the host, you should survive, right? As long as he doesn't get a second hit off. But typically when they come up out of the ground, they do one hit. Then they kind of go AFK for a second, gives you some time to stim. Then they go for their typical melee combo. So not a bad armor choice at all, especially if you find yourself like taking a lot of chest injuries. This could, you know, lower that annoyance a decent amount. All right. Next we have somewhat of a fan favorite that a lot of people literally go crazy for is extra padding. But I have like mixed feelings on extra padding. I find extra padding to be something that is like well loved, but it also provides somewhat of a placebo effect, because the way like armor's been balanced in the past is that medium armor got a buff, not medium armor rating, but medium armor. So in the background, there's some damage resistance tied to the tag of medium armor, but it's not tied to the medium armor rating, right? So as your rating goes up, you take less damage, right? Pretty self-explanatory. But as you go up in rating of like how heavy the armor is, there's also damage reductions, right? So wearing the light gunner set is not the same as just wearing like regular medium armor, if that makes sense, right? And it's kind of the same way as, you know, if you were going to look at, you know, a medium, you know, extra padded going to heavy. It's not as tanky as like actual heavy armor because of that nuance going on there. Also, another little thing to keep in mind is that headshot protection only starts working at 101 armor rating. Now, this might have been changed, but once upon a time, this was the fact, and it's kind of hard to test. Maybe someone has updated information. Let me know in the comments down below if this has changed. But 101 armor was when your headshot protection started to scale up with your armor rating. So if you have 200 armor rating, you have way more headshot protection than if you had 50, right? Because it actually scaled up. But all these 100 armors aren't actually benefiting from increased headshot protection yet, because they don't quite break that, hit that breakpoint. All right. Anyways, all that being said, I think like extra padding is nice. It definitely is, but it is technically just a one perker, right? It's still light armor, but you gain 50 armor rating, which is decent, right? But when we start to see an armor like Unflinching come out, which is 25 armor rating, and then some other useful benefits on the armor, it's like, this is like a 2.5 perker, right? 2.5 perk armor versus, let's say, the 1 perk armor of the damage resistance of Light Gunner, right? You get what I mean? So as from a value power position, Light Gunner is actually not as appealing as maybe just wearing like Unflinching, getting the Unflinching perk, which is actually quite useful. We'll get into that later. And you get some utility of markers actually being placed so you can find side objectives easier, right? Get what I mean? So overall, I like Heavy Gunner, or Light Gunner, and just like, I like it. But I don't love it as much as like other armors in the game and how useful they are. I think it hovers somewhere around like A-, B+, personally. It's somewhere in that range. We'll see where it goes, you know, over the course of this this tier list. But, you know, I think I'm going to stick it in A for now, but it is definitely teetering on that like middle ground for me. Okay, next we have Medic Armor. Medic Armor is typically S tier big time, but if we're under the assumption we're on a Hive world and we have Dragon Roaches and we have Hive Lords everywhere, it's not quite S tier all the time. It feels really good just for like mobility, being able to stim yourself when you're out of stamina and just have unlimited stamina for the next, like, you know, 15 seconds is awesome. And just having the extra stims to keep yourself alive for longer until you get to that next resupply is awesome. 6 stims plus the extra duration is really, really powerful for bugs, especially like if you're pushing into a nest, right? And there's just tons of bugs, you don't have time to kill them all, stim and run through. Some enemies will hit you, but that extra 2 seconds is so nice. Pop another stim. You have 6 to play with. So I found myself in a lot of situations just pre-stimming, running into a nest and just like completing the objective, just continuously stimming because I just keep taking damage. And like you could do that with other armor, but you have 50% less stims. So this one's a bit of another tough one for me because I do think it's like absolutely S tier on like the vast majority of Helldivers, but on Hive Worlds in specific, we're going to get into it, of damage resistance works really well against Hive Lords and Dragons. So at the moment, I'm probably just going to stick it somewhere in S, but it may change throughout the overall tier list. Next, we have the Engineer. The Engineer armor is definitely a staple of a lot of people's builds. You get +2 grenades and you get some recoil reduction. Just remember that recoil reduction also applies when you're standing, by the way. It says only when you're crouched or prone, but it does also work from when you're standing. It's 30% less. And then basically if you crouch, it's 60% less than normal. And then if you're prone, it's 90% less recoil than normal. So it's like a stacking 30%. It's fantastic armor to some extent. The one problem I have with it is that the +2 grenades only really come into like big time use if you die a lot, because almost every grenade in the game doesn't give you bonus grenades when you resupply. Like pyrotechnic gives you 3 when you resupply, but most it's only 2, right? And if you have 5 total, it's not like it's all of a sudden giving you 3 grenades back. The only time you're going to get your maximum grenades back is if you find like the yellow, you know, grenade box. So that's where like the engineer kit becomes better. So when you're fighting the Hive Lord, some people recommend using the grenade passive because you're probably going to be dying a decent amount, and it means you can chuck out 5 thermites, which is actually really good because 5 thermites do a ton of damage to the Hive Lord, right? Especially the armor plating. So it's a good armor, and I think the utility is definitely there, but you have to die quite a bit in order to get full usage out of it, in my opinion. It's somewhere in the B tier. I think it's like closer to B plus just because how useful it is versus Hive Lords, but in the general usefulness of like caves, I do like it. You know, it is nice to have the extra gas grenades and stuff like that, but I would probably just end up using like another armor that I feel like has a better neutral game in my opinion. And the recoil factor becomes a lot less, you know, important to me when you realize that if you just crouch in game, you immediately drop your recoil by 30% immediately. And you can definitely get better at like doing that reliably, right? Basically, anytime you see me playing on stream, I'm crouching when I shoot, almost always. Even if the gun has like next to no recoil, I'll crouch just because it reduces sway as well. So the recoil component doesn't really play a huge factor in my interpretation here. All right, next we have explosive resistance. This one I have a little bit of a curiosity to on whether or not it's actually really good against the Hive Lord. I haven't had an opportunity to fully test it. Sorry, I'm just looking for the armor here. So how explosive works on the bug front is that there's some things that are tied to like explosive damage, essentially. And bile from a bile titan, for instance, is actually explosive because it like spews towards you and then it kind of does like an AoE. So wearing explosive resistance will help you with some of the damage you take from a bile titan. There is definitely still impact damage of the bile hitting you, but there's an explosive component as well. You'll notice sometimes when you die to a bile titan, it says died to explosives, right? I have not noticed that on the Hive Lord personally, but it is extremely possible that that is also happening when the Hive Lord is doing its spit. Now, it doesn't apply to the dragon. It doesn't seem there's any explosive. Basically, it's the beam of fire and the fire on the ground. But it is an interesting one to think about for the Hive Lord. I think, you know, I'm just going to kind of put it in B minus as like the recoil is decent and explosive resistance can be nice for team killing, because that's the other component of this armor, is that if you find you're just getting team killed all the time, and let's be honest, the majority of the time you're being team killed by an explosive, that's the armor to wear, right? It'll reduce that likelihood of you dying to cluster bombs by a ton. So I do recommend. Scout armor is not as powerful as it is on wide open maps, because the way scout armor works in HD2 is it's how far they can detect you, mostly via like visual, right? Not audio, like the one we're going to talk about later. So the 30% is like extremely useful for like wide open maps, so they're not able to like notice you and see you nearly as effective. And the markers are useful for finding side objectives inside the caves, because you can, if you guys didn't know how this one worked, you basically ping the minimap, and every 2 seconds when you ping the minimap with your colored ping, it'll send out a pulse, and that pulse will like find enemies, but also it can spot side objectives. So you can kind of just ping through a map every once in a while and potentially find Stalker Lair, you know, the radar station, so on and so forth, right? Which is actually pretty useful. I do think Scout is like a relatively good option. It's just, obviously it's not going to keep you alive, but you can avoid a lot of combat. And also there's the side of your teammates will get more attention versus you. Because if you're both shooting at a bunch of enemies, they're more likely to see your teammate rather than you, because you have 30% less detection. Does that make sense? So you'll actually be like that rogue in like a group scenario where, you know, you just keep going invisible to the enemy and you take less damage that way, which is actually pretty damn useful. But obviously it's at the expense of your poor teammate standing next to you. All right. Next we have Servo-Assisted. I don't think Servo-Assisted gets as much attention in this scenario because the vast majority of the time you're going to be spent underground, and obviously you're not going to really be throwing stratagems. I do think it is useful against Hive Lords in particular because they will be surfacing every once in a while quite far from you, and having Servo-Assisted means you throw your grenades and stratagems in increased distance, right? Which is really nice. Like the 30% is nothing to scoff at. It's massive. But there's the downside of it will mess with your muscle memory or your visual memory of like, hey, I know that if I throw a stratagem at this angle, it'll fly 50 meters. But if you were Servo-Assisted, it kind of messes with that idea. Limb health is extremely useful for rupture strain warriors and stuff like that, which makes me want to put it like a minus or so. Just because when they're coming up out of the ground, they're less likely to break your like leg or your chest and stuff like that. Because it essentially gives you EHP, right? And that idea is that like if it doesn't break a limb, you will not take as much damage, which is nice, right? This will effectively make you feel tankier, especially when we're talking about like, you know, chest wounds and hemorrhaging and stuff like that. So not bad. Cutting edges, electric resistance. It's so niche that I'm probably just gonna put it C tier. If you like build into it, you know, I think the armor is decent because what's nice about it is that if everybody on the team brings it and everybody brings arc stuff, nobody can really kill each other, which is cool. Which is decent. But the thing is that you have to give up a lot because it is just a one perker. It's only the 95%, which is useful, but you know, not super useful unless you know your whole entire team is going fully arc. Everybody has like the arc dog and you're just going through the caves, which is viable. You could do that, right? Or just maybe you and your teammate go full arc thrower plus, you know, arc dog plus arc grenade, and you know, you can make that work. I've been hoping that the devs would add like EMS resistance with this armor, meaning that you wouldn't get slowed if you walk into an EMS field. It would be a great idea, but we'll see what happens. I really hope they do though. All right, Peak Physique. I think Peak Physique is like a fantastic armor, but it's niche because you're only going to really use it if you're using a melee weapon or you frequently melee, right? Not a lot of players do. And then the second part is you need a weapon that has bad handling on average, or many bad handling weapons to feel good, right? And I can see the point of this, you know, if you're someone who's like an HMG user in the caves, or if you're someone who hates how clunky the recoils feels when you're shooting a dragon in the sky because it's easier to track when you have Peak Physique, for sure. But I think it's like a solid B tier. It's just so niche because it depends on your loadout. It could be an A tier booster if you bring a lot of like weapons that have bad handling, like the Eruptor Dominator, and then you bring like a support weapon like the Recoilless or autocannon if you need to be snappier, or the heavy machine gun, right? And then on top of that, maybe you bring a melee weapon, right? In that scenario, A+, right? Fantastic. But I think for the vast majority of players, just throwing it on, it's probably somewhere in the B tier. You're probably not going to get that much usage of it, other than Rupture warriors can be meleeed, so they can, like, when they come out of the ground, you can time it so you kind of parry them, but it's like an incredibly tight timing. It's very hard to do. Okay, next, moving into flame resistance. I think flame resistance is like easily like S- A tier. It won't be like super effective everywhere, but if you get dragons, I love bringing the flame resistance armor. Like, it goes from like dragons being like super obnoxious, like constantly like either one-shotting you, or like you're just like chip damage like crazy because of all the fire, to you can kind of just stand in the fire. Maybe you'll probably still have to pop a stim, but you can just stand in it and just deal with him, right? It allows you to just focus on dealing with the dragon. Now, obviously, it doesn't really have much of effect outside of that, other than maybe your, you know, napalm teammates, or your, you know, orbital napalm, you know, from the sky. But I do think it's like extremely useful for people that are struggling with dragons in general. I don't think it's like a bad idea to take it. All right. Next, we have gas armor. Now, I'm going to, on purpose, scroll all the way down to the heavy armor, because if you guys don't know this interaction, if you wear the heavy gas armor and vitality, which is the booster that gives you damage resistance, you actually don't take any gas damage. You can just stand in a gas grenade and you take 0 damage. And it's a really cool strategy for the caves because you could just be the gas man, right? Put on a supply backpack, put on gas grenades, maybe even have a sterilizer, orbital gas barrage as well for like the flag missions. Just throw it on the flag and nothing will hit you. They'll randomly swing around and you might get, knocked every once in a while, but it's actually like a legitimate strategy. I do think it's as niche as like some of the other ones. It's probably like low B-, but I will say it's higher than cutting edge just because I think it's actually genuinely more useful to you when you wear it. When you wear like electrified resistance, it's mostly just like it's useful for your teammates because they're not killing you constantly. You're doing it preemptively so your teammate doesn't kill you, whereas the gas, you're using it in conjunction with maybe your actual build, so it more closely fits in with what you're doing. And I do think it works well in those like gas oriented loadouts, but obviously you need to bring gas for it to be useful. Unflinching. Unflinching is something that I genuinely think it's like somewhere like it's a little bit better in my opinion than our typical like extra padding. I just because you get more usage out of it. Unfortunately, there's no like heavy armor, but because we're talking about hive worlds and we're talking about bugs, I genuinely don't recommend bringing heavy armor the vast majority of the time. Gas loadout is the exception. The unflinching is more useful than you think it is because it will prevent you from being like, I'm sure you've been in a situation where you are charging up a quasar shot and a random scavenger comes over, smacks you, and then you fly up in the sky, like you shoot the sky, right? That won't happen when you wear this armor. Also, you'll take less damage when you do get hit, which is fantastic. And you get the side benefit of the markers. Like I explained with the scout armor, it's actually a really useful thing for the caves to scout out the caves and find side objectives way before your like radius of like, running next to them would have found them, which is fantastic. I genuinely think it's a little bit slept on like how the armor has progressed over time. And I do recommend it even over scout armor in my opinion. Cause like I said, the detection range is more or less for like line of sight and the unflinching is just more universal, right? A little bit tankier, you have some scouting capabilities, and the utility of not getting flinched is fantastic for dealing with like AT weapons in particular that you need to like line up. It's really useful. We've all been in that situation with the Quasar, I'm sure of it. Okay, next with the Killzone armor. This one will be going straight up to S tier. I think it is so useful for your loadout, both because of the acid prevention, because you will be dealing with spewers, the rupture spewers. You're going to be dealing with hive lords. Hive lords spit acid a lot, and you will survive a lot more with the Helldivers armor. And it's got fire resistance. It's not a crazy amount, but it's enough to keep you alive a lot of time with dragons, right? It's kind of like this all-encompassing armor, right? It does give you some gas resistance, which is nice for the caves and all your teammates using gas. Now, the electricity protection will not actually prevent you from dying to an arc thrower shot or a Tesla because there's just too much damage. But you may potentially survive like a somewhat close shot from like a de-escalator or the grenade, which is, nothing to scoff at. So it just has a lot of encompassing like, utility on the hive worlds. I absolutely love bringing this thing if I just don't want to die a lot to the Hive Lord or to the Dragon. It feels really nice. And spewers just genuinely they're not as scary because they're just in general just like 50% less damage. That's really nice. Okay, next we have the Urban Legends, easily another S tier. It's once again similar to the medic armor. It doesn't have any defensive traits. in the sense that, like, at least with the medic armor, you're going to get the bonus stims, but you are getting so much offensive capabilities. You're getting faster reload, you're getting more primary ammo, and it's more primary ammo also for your support weapons. If you guys haven't read, I wish there was a medium siege ready armor. Just a quick little side note. But if you haven't read, it doesn't affect backpack weapons, but any weapon that doesn't have a backpack, like a grenade launcher, gets an extra magazine, which is fantastic just for those, you know, expeditions into the caves. You don't have to be as worrisome about finding an opening to call in a resupply, which genuinely is very useful. Once again, you don't get any defensiveness, but I'm assuming you know that going in, and, you know, the offensiveness will be your defense, which is fair. I still think it's S tier, even though it doesn't have any defense, but, you know, keep in mind, if stuff is just killing you like crazy, probably look at maybe a more defensive-oriented armor. Okay. Next, we have the Servants of Freedom. Servants of Freedom armor is the integrated explosives. More or less, it's kind of just a goofy armor. They did add +2 grenades to it, so it does have a little bit more utility, similar to like the engineer kit, but I don't think it's as powerful as the engineer kit. I'm gonna put it like somewhere like C+, B-, just because the +2 grenades makes it more of a B, but the explosion view afterwards can sometimes hurt, sometimes help, right? Obviously, you can throw yourself into a bug hole and it'll blow it up. It doesn't blow up a ball titan hole, by the way. And you possibly could kill like a charger or a bunch of like enemies. You could throw yourself at them, which is something. It's pretty cinematic, but you could also just die next to your teammate and kill your teammate. It happens more than you think. So you could easily be hurting your team by bringing this. And because it's not a very popular armor, a lot of players don't recognize the armor and that they shouldn't stand near you when you die. So they might just like come on over and die half a second later as well with you. So it's definitely an armor that I think I'm mostly going to put in C tier. Just because it has that potential of like actually screwing over your team more than helping, which sucks. Next, we have the Gunslinger armor. This is basically just fully around your sidearm. If you're a Talon enjoyer, or like, let's say you love bringing, you know, the Senator or something like that, absolutely. I just think that playstyle typically isn't actually that useful, but at least it does benefit it big time. I'm probably going to put it somewhere in like B-, C+, just because it's a very niche playstyle, and I don't think that playstyle really helps you that much in the caves, unless you are just like tunnel visioning on like the Talon and you just want the Talon to feel amazing, which is fair, but I don't think the armor set in general is like that crazy. You'll probably get more usage out of it on like maybe other fronts or in other situations where maybe you're not relying so much on your primary weapon when you're in the caves, or your support weapon in the caves. So yeah, decent, but not the best. All right, next we have the Masters of Ceremony armor. This was also changed. If you guys don't remember, it has 50% melee damage, decent. It's got 50% chance to avoid grievous limb injury, which is actually better than you think, especially with how bad bleeding is nowadays, right? If you get hit in the chest, there's a 50% chance that chest wound doesn't actually turn into bleeding, which is really nice. Also, if there's a warrior nipping at your legs, there's a 50% chance that your legs don't also become a bad limb as well. Because if you get hit in the limb and you don't have a stim available, like in your leg, you are so slow. You might as well just, you know, quit out of the mission and come back in. You're dead, right? You're dead. And the last one is reload speed on primary weapons. Just an overall fantastic trait to go with. I think easily it's somewhere in like the middle A tier, probably up there with like Unflinching. Just like solid. It's like it's not quite as good as like the other S tiers, but I do think it's like completely solid, especially for Rupture Strain, where like melee does come into account pretty decently. And with how bad bleeding is, like I said, I think the chest injury is also quite nice. Next, we have the Force of Law. Force of Law is 25% less chest injury, 25% explosive damage, and preventing all bleeding. Decent. I do think that you don't get hit in the chest that often, I say this all the time for the bot front. When you're shooting your weapon, your arms are out in front of you. Most likely your arms are going to get hit way more than your chest. Now, if something's hitting you from the back, it's more likely because obviously there's nothing in the way. I think it's like B+, personally. I think the bleeding is like completely useful component of it, but like the chest injury is kind of meh. It's like okay. And then the 25% explosive damage reduction, as we talked about, decent for like team killing and decent for like ball titans, but ball spewers don't really have an explosive effect, and I'm not sure that the Hive Lord actually has an explosive effect. Maybe someone in the comments can let me know down below. I see it mostly on par with like the extra padding. Like extra padding has a little bit more usefulness because it's general damage reduction and it keeps you in a certain armor class, but I do like the prevention of bleeding damage. That is quite nice, and it is decent damage reduction. So I don't know. I think I'm going to put a B+, and I'm going to favor the extra padding over it, but it's pretty damn close. I see them as very close to one another. Okay, next we have the death prevention armor, the Adreno-Defibrilator. This one has been slightly fixed. You're no longer immune inside your mech, aka your Hulk, your Dreadnought. You're no longer a Dreadnought anymore. It's okay. 50% arc resistance, not that good. 2-second longer stim, pretty decent. It's good. You only get 4 stims, but it's pretty good. And then the last one is provides one-time short-lived resuscitation. So basically how it works is if you take a bunch of damage and you go to 1 HP, you'll essentially be revived as long as you didn't lose a limb in like some gruesome explosion or something. You'll be like back at 1 HP and you like slowly lose health over time, right? Well, if full health heals you and then you slowly lose health over time. You can still absolutely die. My problem with this armor is that you are essentially have like broken limbs everywhere. Like your limbs are so broken that you are so slow with it. You can keep yourself alive longer by stimming or having someone stim pistol you, which is cool, but I wish you weren't slowed. I wish the adreno part of adrenaline would just like, you know, kickstart your heart and you're like super fast, but you're like dying really fast. Remember, if you've ever thought of like the movie called Cranked, where the guy's like constantly like, you know, like in like shocking his heart to keep him alive. I kind of wanted it like that, but like stims are like thing that are keeping you alive. So yeah, I don't know. I don't think Adreno-Defibrilator is that useful of an armor. I think it's like C+. You know, I think you're just better off taking another armor that will just prevent the damage in the first place, or just taking Democracy Protects, which literally just stops you from dying outright, and you don't have to worry about a bleeding effect afterwards, which is kind of sucks. Okay, next we have the ODST armor, which is medium. I will say that because they're both medium, that is a little bit of a down rank on it. Because if you're someone who loves the mobility of light armor like I do on bugs, it is a factor that you have to play into. So provides immunity to leg injury, solid, actually very solid for bugs. And then the wearer makes 50% less noise when moving, and your point of interest indication range is like farther. Both decent for caves especially, right? All three are actually quite decent, and for that reason it's like probably a B+ picking, just because in the caves audio tends to be the #1 factor for why an enemy knows you're there. Not as much line of sight, just because the line of sight is so much more narrow. Finding side objectives inside the caves is actually a really big component to finding those stalker layers, or finding that like that radar station and so on and so forth, right? It makes it a hell of a lot easier when you know where those are. And then the last part is not taking any leg injury will help you quite a bit. It will save your life a decent amount against bugs when they're just breaking those limbs, especially rupture, because when they come out of the ground, they're doing the pounce, and I find it hits my legs more often than not. So decent. I think it's like actually B+. I think people are actually a little too harsh on it. It's quite nice, actually. Okay, next we have the newest armor, which is the Dust Devils. We have the Desert Stormer, which is 40% resistance to fire, gas, acid, and electricity. very similar to the Killzone, but you get the added 20% throw range, which actually is a decent trade-off for 10% damage reduction versus those. Like, I genuinely think it's like also up there. It just depends on whether or not you value the servo-assisted more or more damage resistance. I think it's a little bit better than Killzone overall, but that's just my personal preference on like the servo-assisted coming into quite a bit of use fighting Hive Lords and like throwing things at maybe a dragon, attacking a teammate, or, resupplying a teammate in the caves. It can be quite nice to throw them, a decent distance from you in those like large caverns and stuff like that. It's quite nice. I genuinely think it's like one of the better armors you can bring for the Hive missions. That like it's something that I bring a lot just because I got so tired of dealing with dragons or dying to the spit of the Hive Lord. I just got so tired of getting one shot by a dragon pass where like all the flame hits you and you just get one shot and you didn't even have time to stim from it. Just like the ability to prevent that felt so nice. And then when you're in the caves taking less damage from spewers, the throw distance, although is not amazing for the inside of the caves, it is nice still to be able to throw that grenade farther or throw that stratagem, a little bit farther from you. It is quite nice. Will people maybe pick it over like the top, Urban Legends or Medic Armor? Maybe not. But if you're getting tired of dying to those things and you're just like running out of revives, which happens a lot when I'm random queuing, the vast majority of time that like I'm joining these missions mid progress, they have like 3 revives left and they're 5 minutes in, and it's usually just like dragon spam or the Hive Lord or just like spewers from inside the cave sniping them from 15-20 meters. It's not always just like rupture warriors and stuff like that. You'd be surprised how many times you're dying to one of these separate elements. Right? It does make a difference. So it's honestly my top pick at the moment. If you're struggling in those Hive worlds, is to grab one of those 2 armors. And if you don't, maybe grab like full offensive, a little bit defensive, fire resistance for dragons. The Smash and Ceremony is never a bad option. Flinching, trust me, flinching is better than you think. The scout armor is really nice. I'm kind of just going through them now because I'm just curious on whether or not I'm going to change anything. I think servo-assisted is more or less very similar to extra padded. We're going to keep extra padded on the A minus tier. ODST I think people are sleeping on just because of how good it is in the caves. I think the chest protection is nice on Force a lot, but Engineer is mostly for killing Hive Lords, but other than that, I don't really recommend it that much. Peak Physique is too niche, but still very nice niche. Democracy Protects, decent overall. That's all I'm going to say. It's mid, but decent. Explosive Resistance, I'm not sure if it's affected by Hive Lords, but maybe it is. And then it's actually a little bit better than I thought. Gas you actually have to like build into it, but I do think it's like a solid choice if you build into it. Adreno, I can't really recommend it, but it's like okay because at least you get the timing on it. But to some extent, because of the audio bugs with it, maybe I want to put it in D tier. You know what? I'm just gonna put it in D tier until they make me run faster when it activates. I'm saying it. Cutting Edge, if people are definitely like building into it, and that goes for like your entire team, or you just hate when your teammates kill you with it. Borderland Justice is sidearms, decent, but it's a very niche playstyle that I don't think is actually that effective. Servants of Freedom can actually hurt your team, which is why it's this low, and I don't really want to change it. It might actually just be a D tier, but I'm going to assume that you're going to stay away from your teammates, and then you're going to get decent usage out of it when you die. I'm going to assume that. Anyways, that is my tier list. Let me know in the comments down below what you guys thought of it. What's your S tier? These are mine. What's yours? Everybody's got their own play style differences and stuff like that. So you guys are going to favor something, and I'm curious to know. Please consider leaving a like on the video if you enjoyed. Consider leaving a sub for more upcoming tier lists and just in general build guides and other content coming. We're actually going to be playing Borderlands 4, and we might be putting out a review video for that. We'll see. So keep an eye out for that. And also come by the stream. A lot of times we record these live, so you can come on by and you can, react to it live or just ask me questions afterwards, because I do like kind of a Q&A after. If you guys are wondering about the YouTube streams, by the way, the YouTube streams will return, but I'm going to basically be making like an alternate YouTube channel. It's already been made, Maplewood_TV. I might change the titles and stuff like that, but I have made an alternate channel. We were just noticing that when I stopped streaming one day, my viewership and just like in general, my YouTube videos got shared so much more than when I was streaming every day. So YouTube was like heavily suppressing my YouTube videos for like the last like couple months since I've been streaming on YouTube. And that being said, consider going through my videos. You might have missed a bunch of them. That might be very useful to you, like new player start guide, or like the builds for people that have no war bonds, right? I made a loadout for everyone, or even just the war bond tier list video that I made last week. A lot of people are asking like, hey, I don't know which war bonds to buy. Which one should I get? Check out that video. It's great. Anyways, much love YouTube. Peace. Whew. Alrighty. Let me do a marker. /marker. Tier list video. Armor. Okay. Base tier list. I think I did pretty good with that. I felt comfortable with it. Do people test what brings you further on a long period of time, War Pack or Jump Pack? I believe it was very similar, but I think War Pack won ultimately. But it kind of depends on the terrain of the map. If you have a map that has like a lot of undulations and stuff like that, Jump Pack will actually be better.